Thank you all for coming to another event at our conference to restore humanity. Quick reminder that this conference is made possible by you all, our wonderful attendees and our sponsors, Holistic Think Tank, Cortico, who we're meeting with here today, Antioch University, Education Evolving with Teacher-Powered Schools, and Unrulr, who I believe maybe has the next session after this. You can find links to those resources and programs in the conference Discord and on YouTube, linked below this video. And I'm stoked to introduce Cortico and Local Voices Network, whose frameworks and platform HRP is indebted to in our own work with schools, as they talk about centering young people as experts of their own experience. And I've got a quote here real quick. It's one that we use in our work in schools here too. It's something that Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot wrote at the beginning of Carla Shalaby's book, Troublemakers, in which she said, quote, "The work is one of reimagining what a free and loving learning place might be, and children are the best source of beginning this envisioning and liberating project. They are, after all, the great imaginers. They will lead the way, the troublemakers at the front of the line. We must begin by listening to them," end quote. So, Cortico, Local Voices, Kimberly, Hannah, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This is so exciting. Thank you for opening up with that amazing quote. I think it really ties in perfectly to what we'll be talking and sharing with you all today about. So I'm going to just quickly introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Mota. I'm coming to you from New York City. And I am currently the partner support lead at Cortico. And I'm going to start sharing my screen to really just kick us off. So bear with me as I do that.
As a reminder, this conference is made possible by our wonderful attendees and our sponsors, Holistic Think Tank, Cortico, who we had just met with, Antioch University, Education Evolving with Teacher-Powered Schools, and of course, Unrulr, whose session you're in here today. You can find the links to their resources and programs in the conference Discord, and if you're watching this on YouTube, linked below this video. And as a heads up here, when Chris and I met with Aaron a couple months ago for an Unrulr showcase, we were floored. It was the piece that we'd been missing as an education system, that is to say, what is a simple way to tell complicated human stories of learning? How can we honor growth and iteration in the learning process? How can we share those stories with peers, with colleagues and parents? So Unrulr is this deceptively simple tool that facilitates all of that from your phone. So thank you so much for joining us here today, Aaron, to talk about the wonderful tool that is Unrulr.
Thanks for having me. I wanted to start the conversation by kind of going through a deck around the power of reflection and the importance of documentation in learning communities. I'm an educator who was trained in Hawaii and who was really lucky to have native Hawaiian project-based learning teachers. And it really connected me back to the first 7 years of my life, which were spent in Lesotho in Southern Africa, where learning was really communal, where it was about authentic relationships between mentors and mentees. And when there was an actual purpose, behind what we were learning. And I had this really beautiful job as a K-12 capstone coordinator at a school in Hawaii, where I was managing capstones in 5th, 8th, and 12th grade, kind of the bookends of each learning experience. And I was grappling with not only documentation, but communal learning. And I was really influenced by a book called An Ethic of Excellence by Ron Berger, where he talked about artifacts of excellence, like learners and their work being teachers of other learners. And I was really interested in challenging the power dynamic between student and teacher and trying to create, like what's on my shirt, one of my favorite music collectives of all time, Soulquarians, like this collective in the classroom as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm first going to talk about kind of how we view documentation and the power of documentation at Unrulr, and then show you a little bit of the tool. But this is just as much evangelism for the power of reflection and capturing process and learning as it is for a tool that I also happen to be working with and working on. So I'll share my screen and we'll dive in. So the title of this kind of conversation is that learner documentation is a superpower. This is a moment early on in my teaching career in Hawaii where a student didn't have the money to create a rig for his camera that he was trying to do time lapses for. And we built it together. And what was so powerful was not the shots that he took, but capturing the process of how he created it. My kind of beginning TED Talk language is that, for us at Unrulr and for me as an educator, I found that documentation begets transparency, transparency begets trust, and trust begets agency. When people are able to see the kind of magic that's happening in, I don't know, whatever buzzword we're calling it now, deeper learning, project-based learning, real world learning, just learning that I think everyone on this call believes in, it's easier to create policy around it. When there's evidence of it, it's easier for students to use it in the job application process or college application process. And it's easier to get families on board when there's evidence of all the great learning that we're doing. And for me, I had this immense imposter syndrome because I was at a school that was also AP centric. And so all the quote unquote rigor was supposedly happening in AP. And the programs that we were building out around projects, around learner agency and passion, Unrulr and tools like it were so vital in being able to translate that out and to have actual evidence from students, not just kind of narrative quotes that we could put in. This is a moment, I run a youth entrepreneurship program in Hawaii every summer, and I love watching youth ideate. I love watching the process of them getting their ideas out into the world. And I've been obsessed for so many years on how we capture that in a way that feels authentic. Another moment of learners on Mauna Kea, this mountain in Hawaii, both connecting to Hawaiian culture and the protests that followed, but also just having an authentic and organic moment. I've thought about how we capture these moments without taking learners out of the moment itself at the same time. So why is or are documentation and evidence important? They allow a learning community, families, anyone in this stakeholder space in education to see not only the end result, the product, the demo day, the exhibition of learning that is so fetishized now, but also the process and the reflections and all that badass evidence of metacognition and critical thinking. I grew up teaching in Hawaii, and there's this idea of a va'a mentality or a voyaging mentality. And you can get to an end place, but it's all these awesome waypoints. It's all these spaces in between the voyage that are so powerful in trying to kind of share out with your community. So there's types of documentation. There's test scores, there's teacher-driven documentation, but for me, learner-written reflections are really powerful. And the gold standard is when learners have agency in their documentation, where there's the mix of multimodalities and multimedia. The great Angela Stockman at Damon University talks about the power of allowing learners to feel seen by them being able to represent their growth and capture their growth in a multimedia or a medium that feels more authentic to them. And so much of my work at Unrulr, which is kind of like a Humans of New York in education, is just about giving learners choice and agency over how they're documenting their growth and learning. So for me, it's all about trust and joy and building a culture of documentation and reflection. Sometimes it's awkward in the beginning, but when that culture is there, it's not weird anymore to take a photo or capture the video of yourself or others embarking on work or building something or creating, or even just kind of reflecting and having an exit ticket. So for me, documentation allows feedback to be actionable and implementable, and it creates this authentic feedback loop where assessment isn't just rote kind of back and forth. There's actual outcomes that can happen from the assessment. And then for culture, that there's this culture of visible learning, culture of storytelling. There's this joyful collaboration that makes a classroom into a collective. So, for me, a culture of documentation looks like documentation with immediate purpose, documentation for community. In Hawaii, we talk about kuleana, which means responsibility, but also the privilege of responsibility, the ability to document for others. It's a core part of both the learning tool that I work for, but also how I teach. I want learners to be documenters and storytellers for themselves and other learners. And then that classic portfolio, like I want to document for myself because I'm proud of this. And I want the learners I work with, I want them to celebrate their work and others to have kind of a stake in it. So much of what I've learned over the past 2 years is that there's an immense power of pause and reflection. When you actually allow learners space for creativity, the great Kwaku Anning in San Diego talks a lot about the need for space and time and creativity. and time for metacognition. Like I have run I'll stop my share for a second. I'll have a real Aaron Schorn moment. I have messed up so many learning communities by not allowing for time for reflection and retrospectives. And I've fetishized lean startup methodology, and I've talked about all of these different spaces, but I haven't allowed for retrospectives and reviews because I'm so obsessed with the end product. And the problem with that is that learners don't get to celebrate what they achieved. They don't get to understand process. They don't get to like really be able to convene with each other and celebrate it. And so much of my work now at Unrulr is really, talking about that need for pause, because it's always the thing that goes out the door when we're building a new program. That time for reflection, that almost time for grace, where a learner is just kind of thinking about that space. And yet it's so core to actually what's taught in industry, the idea of agile project management, right? This concept of reviews and retrospectives. And so I always have to, I just got done running a 10-day intensive boarding entrepreneurship camp in Hawaii. And we had to intentionally build in an hour every day, which wasn't enough, to just have students reflect, with journals, virtually, because otherwise that would have been the first thing that kind of went by the wayside. Let me dive back into my screen share. There's this moment, I'm out on the coast with Pua Lincoln, the greatest teacher in the history of mankind. That is an absolute fact. And Pua is in the most sacred spiritual place as a navigator. She sailed on Hokulea, the voyaging canoe, but also as a teacher and as a native Hawaiian. And Pua is talking about our ancestors. And of course, as she says that, the wind picks up and basically everyone that's there is in tears, weeping. And she tells everyone to pull out their cell phones, which is not usually what you hear in an experiential education, experience. And she says, go into Unrulr. This was before I joined the company full time, and I was using it. And she said, document how you're feeling in this moment right now before you got on the bus, And she knew that when we got on the bus, what we were feeling in that time and space was really, really important and needed to be captured. And there were tons of moments where we didn't capture it, where we kept it for us, where the moment was too sacred to share or to assess. But for Pua, this was such an important moment to have learners display metacognition and critical thinking, to connect their ancestry and culture and backgrounds and peaks and valleys to what we were doing and trying to achieve that way. And Pua taught me the power of documenting process. And we used tons of analog tools. We did the cliche Stanford D School, Olin College of Engineering, giant butcher paper that makes us feel special. But at the end of the day, we wanted to do a lot of tactile things for students to build a lot of pieces out. And the power of Unrulr was that we were then taking photos and being able to have that for ourselves for future year and onboarding, but also for students to see their process, to see the ideation, research, project management, product development, iteration of MVPs and prototypes. We had all of this great physical evidence that we could turn into digital evidence. And this is from this youth entrepreneurship program I helped to run. And there was this fervor, I'm sure many of you have experienced this with your students and teams, building this out, building out their businesses, their ideas, their ventures, the campaigns and activism they wanted to create. And we just wanted to make sure that they knew that it needed to be celebrated and kind of documented. And there's tons of digital tools. I'm clearly biased on one of these, but there's an immense amount of value in any of these being used for project management, but also to capture process. And I think ultimately why I took this job, because I have a healthy hatred of ed tech, and now I find myself in education technology, is that Unrulr solved a huge problem, which was how do I assess and how do I document? And at the same time, how do I not overprescribe? How do I not kill off the agency by having too many assignments, right? Too many things that make the adults feel good, but make the kids feel exhausted. And so I think that's ultimately why I'm here and in this position as well. And then what I saw in my learning was the power of video reflections. There's an image of John Nash from the University of Kentucky who uses Unrulr with his design thinking students. Having exit ticket reflections is a really incredible way of having learners process, but also build this culture and kind of like muscle rep of metacognition that we've seen in our own learning communities and then in a lot of the schools and nonprofits we work with too. And then just having that evidence be real, connecting documentation to your competencies, your rubrics and learner outcomes, having your entire learning community be involved in assessment and feedback, kind of like that idea of that Brene Brown talks about of living your values. There's this ability in Unrulr to take any competency, any portrait of a graduate, any KPI, and turn it into a system of tags that we call cogs. And every time a learner is posting, they're tagging that post with one of these competencies that you and your student body have kind of connected around. And it takes a lot of the qualitative data and makes it quantitative. And for me, this was huge. As a teacher who just had narrative feedback, who wasn't grading the senior year capstone or 8th grade capstone, having real evidence that was connected to our rubric and our competencies, again, legitimized our program and also allowed us to share with families and parents and employers the skills that students were manifesting and building out. What I always talk about when onboarding people onto Unrulr is humans of New Yorking it. Having the first prompts you create, and this applies to any classroom experience, be about the identity of the learner. It allows you to differentiate, but it also sets the tone of human connection, regardless of if it's a math class or a PBL entrepreneurship course or an engineering class. It allowed me in my learning to be able to, speak to student experiences kind of from the get-go too. And there's this idea from Lean Startup called a minimum viable product. Reflection doesn't mean you have to rebuild all of your curriculum. It means you just have to build out some time in every lesson or multiple times a week to ask your students to reflect and to share it out. And we found in our work and research that when learners know that their reflections and documentation are being looked at, they're more likely to document because there's someone there, there's purpose, there's praise, there's also questions and critical thinking that emerge. And it's been really cool to see that kind of evidence in those spaces. So I wanted to show the tool a little bit and then save time for questions and answers. And Unrulr is both, let me try that again. Unrulr is both a mobile platform, there's a power in meeting youth where they already live, and also a web browser platform. So in terms of equity, we've designed the UX and UI to be really similar for both. And again, the power is that learners are able to document in a much more frictionless manner. And teachers are able to create scaffolded prompts and questions, but we've seen so much kind of culture usage where a couple times a week, learners just know that on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or Tuesdays and Thursdays, they're doing scrums, these kinds of like kind of check-ins. What did I work on last week? What am I working on this week? What are my blockers or what am I proud of? And then also doing these great kind of video or audio reflections as well. And there's so much power in a learning community, not pulling someone else's standards or competencies, but creating their own on the back end of Unrulr, and then having their learning community be able to tag. And there's also this power. We work with a lot of big picture learning schools. I'm at the Big Picture Learning Conference right now in Kansas City. This feature came from a big picture learning school in California. And it's called a journey. It allows a learner to go back and look at previous posts and turn them into this timeline journey that they're able to kind of share out with the world. So I'm going to log in quickly. I'm going to use SSO. We do a single sign-on with Google and Microsoft, so there's no username and passwords. My home feed in Unrulr is like the front page of Reddit. All of the learning communities that I'm a part of are right here on my front page. And I'm able to just dive in and give feedback to a nonprofit or another organization or a school or a class that's using it. I'm able to have all of the communities that my email is associated with on the back end kind of there as well. When I hit search, I'm able to dive directly into whatever learning community I'm a part of. And this is my favorite. This is me as a teacher with Pua, who I referenced before. And Pua used Unrulr as this kind of SEL culture and onboarding tool. Pua used Unrulr to be able to tell her students the journey that they would go on. And then she asked her students, who are you and what fuels you? And we were able to get, and with permission to share all of this, Naya reflecting on her connection to the ocean, or Sarah reflecting on her Paniolo cowgirl heritage on the Big Island of Hawaii. And it allowed Sarah, who doesn't feel comfortable writing an essay on her identity or doing a circle sit where we talk about our feelings, to be able to capture who she was in a modality that felt more comfortable to her. And out on the ocean, out on the coast, being able to, I just want you to read this for a second. It's the most important reflection a learner has ever captured in a program I've been in. I'm just going to give it, I'll mute myself here so you don't hear the conference background. I mean, for Naya to capture this moment is powerful. This post was the centerpiece of her exhibition at the end of the school year. We call it a Ho'ike in Hawaii, a celebration of learning. And it was incredible to see the many iterations of a native Hawaiian surfboard that she made in person. But it was even more powerful to have that post as a centerpiece. When you hit self in Unrulr, a learner sees every single post that they've ever created. They're able to kind of dive in and create this living and breathing portfolio that they can share with the world. And we're one of the only edtech products that actually allows a user to keep using Unrulr for free well after they graduate. This data is theirs. They can keep using the tool. And we're also one of the only edtech products that has this widget that switches over their school email to their personal email, because many schools will kind of cut off the school email. We want to build this culture of learning and documentation kind of within these learners and spaces. And this journey feature we've seen used a lot to kind of fight what happens many times in project-based learning, which is that there's just too many milestone assignments. There's too much work. Let me find a journey that I love. It's just this ability for me to go and choose and kind of capture all of these different moments. We had a school ask to actually replace their presentations with an Unrulr journey in a Pechakucha way. You're able to showcase just the imagery of all that you've kind of created too. And there's an ability in a safe way to be able to publish a post and be able to share it out with the world. You have to have the right security settings. You can take a post that was internal and private to your community, publish it to the web, and turn it into a unique hyperlink that can be shared with families, similar to like a view-only Google Doc. There's also an ability in Unrulr, if you notice that there's these kind of white globes in the top right, these are all the posts I've published that I can unpublish as well, to kind of hit this green globe at the top and create a public portfolio that's iterative, that can be shared out at kind of any time. You know, a learner wants to get their work out into the world as well. So please forgive the absolute shotgun approach to the demo of a product. I'm not an edtech salesperson, even though that's what a lot of my day is. But like, I'm trying to show you the functionality and why I'm so excited about what this can kind of do in learning communities and in spaces. And we're seeing it used across entire schools. You know, students come into 9th grade, by the time they graduate, they have these incredible portfolios that capture their learning. Hillbrook, which is a great school in Los Gatos, there's building a high school, and it's their learning tool. I think they have to use Blackbot as an LMS, but it's really their day-to-day kind of capturing the beautiful messiness of learning. And then we see other schools that use it in their entrepreneurship programs or schools within schools. And we're seeing use cases in so many different spaces. So I would love to open the floor up for questions or thoughts. And I'll absolutely throw my email in here too. And we have this beautiful partnership with Human Restoration Project. So I'm sure that there'll be more kind of coming. But maybe like, you know, maybe Chris, you can start before we go to Q&A. Like, I'm sure you have a healthy hatred of edtech as well. It's an industry that's overpromised and underdelivered for a long time. Like, what about this was appealing to you? Like, why have you given me this time?
Yeah, I mean, more than happy to. I mean, the fact of the matter is, as many of you know, I'm a former teacher. This sounds like such like a sales pitch. I swear we didn't pre-plan this. I'm just saying this from the heart. I felt like every ed tech tool that I either purchased for myself or the school purchased for me kind of ran through its life cycle in about a week. Like, I got super pumped up that I was going to use it. I used it like 2 times in a class, and then we never spoke about it ever again. And like a school probably spent like hundreds to perhaps thousands for a site license on a product because it was kind of one and done. I didn't really see a purpose behind it. What attracts me to this is that it's a system. Like, this is something that quite literally could replace your assessment system, or at least be like a major addition to it. And I apologize in advance if you hear my cat in the background yelling at me. It's very, very, very mad that I'm doing this. But I mean, Aaron, I don't know if you want to walk through like how simple it is. We were just working with a school that's designing an interdisciplinary school within a school. Actually, near where Teresa is in her district, who's in the chat. And the problem that we ran into, which we run into with a lot of schools that we work with, is we want to try out portfolios. We want to try doing ungrading. We want to try doing more project-based learning, but the LMS makes it really awkward to do so, just because of like how you have to enter in points and just how you share data and what you see. And Unrulr kind of landed at the exact right time where it's like, well, just you could use this, and we could make a system that uses Unrulr, but also you could like enter in ones and zeros in the gradebook if you have to, and just link to Unrulr. There's a lot of different ways you could use it. I don't know if that did a good job selling it, but yeah, if you want to walk through it, that'd be sick.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple questions in here. Emma, we scholarship anyone that wants it. So like whatever a school's budget is, that's what they pay. Unrulr is 18 a learner. We tack on onboarding. But like we just, whatever a school has in that moment is what they pay. We want anyone that wants access to it to use it. And so it's been successful for us in places that normally wouldn't be able to utilize it as well. It's good. You had a question about a QR code. So what happens is when you publish a post, it turns into a unique hyperlink. And you can turn any hyperlink into a QR code. We don't have a magical QR code button yet, but that's an easy process of turning something into a QR code too. And I'll show you how to create a post, kind of the ease of it in those spaces too. And there was another question around getting youth to use it and seeing the impact of it. There is zero onboarding with teenagers. That is not an exaggeration. It has the UX and UI of Instagram. That's kind of what it looks like, right? And so it's a visual way of doing it. There's onboarding with teachers because in Unrulr, you have to choose the evidence first. You have to choose the audio or the photo or the video or the PDF all combined before you do the writing. And for some educators, that's difficult to kind of wrap their head around. For youth, it's not hard because that's how they document already. And there's a mix of operations and structure and culture in onboarding, right? There's a power in prompts, and I can show you John Nash's use case at the University of Kentucky, where it's scaffolded, where it's a very direct question or it's content being delivered. And prompts are awesome, especially in middle school, scaffolded, kind of really wanting to get a specific question answered. But there's an immense power in culture, in saying this is the tool that we use on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis to be able to document the learning that we're doing. And it depends on the culture of a classroom. Some people kind of mandate that, right? Whether they're grading in a classroom or not, they're saying, what are you trying to capture and get out of those spaces as well? There's a question in there. We're completely FERPA and COPA compliant. We're a preferred provider with the DOE of Hawaii. I cannot tell you how damn arduous that process was, but it means how we store data and what it means for COPA and FERPA has to be beyond on point. And that's been great. I mean, it's been great to be an ethical company in an industry that sometimes isn't ethical. We do nothing with learner data. There is no selling of learner data. You see that in a lot of other ed tech companies. And in fact, the learner kind of keeps their data in perpetuity in that space as well. You can download it. There's this, someone asked how you create a post. Chris, do you see my screen?
Yes,
Okay.
You're good.
So, if I wanted to create, we call them moments. And if I'm doing this on my mobile phone or iPad or tablet, it's even more powerful because I could do it live, similar to social media. If I'm doing it from my computer, as of now, you have to pull from a downloads or documents folder. The media has to be created. And so I'm going to hit upload. You're not going to see my downloads folder that pops up. And I'm going to pull a couple images. From this youth entrepreneurship program that I got back from 3 days ago in Hilo, Hawaii. And there can be up to 9 pieces of multimedia here. And of course, I chose just the same one over and over again. And this could be a mix of video, audio, PDF. And then what I'm doing is I'm choosing from the set of what we would call cogs at Unrulr, In this case, the competencies, the sets of competencies. And these are our core values as a company. This is going to be about, this is me doing some metacognition. What do those pictures represent? Following curiosity. Maybe a little bit of finding joy in learning as well. And then I'm writing a caption. And this caption could be 1,000 words. It could be 5 words, which is the name of the entrepreneurship program. And then as a learner, I'm able to choose what community I want it to go into. And I'm a part of a ton of communities. You might have 1 or 2 that you want to add it into. And I also have a choice. Do I want to keep it private for myself? Do I want to share it just with someone in the teacher role? Or do I want to share it with learners and teachers? I'm able to preview it. I'm able to actually edit it later on. And then only the community that I shared it with is able to see that post. I see it on my home feed, my kind of like front page of Reddit feed. I see it within my Unrulr community. And I also see it in Self. And there's an ability, one thing I didn't show before that I'm kind of reminded of, another school I have permission to share. There's an ability to see all of the posts from this learning community of 20 awesome young women from Kansas City. I'm able to, again, with permission, be able to click into Claire's posts and just look at her posts in Unrulr, what she tagged, what skills she tagged, but also her comments. Inquiry is a huge part of the tool. And then in a cool way, her trends. Each one of these icons represents one of the portraits of a graduate, one of their competencies, right? So I can see there's more evidence of growth-minded learner than there is of inclusive community builder. I can click into it. I can just see the posts from that as well. But Kelly, the teacher in this cohort, can also look at his entire cohort and say, what trends, what's happening in my learning community? There's a lot more evidence of growth-minded learner than there is humble difference maker. And Kelly can download all of that quantitative data as well. So we see this big fit in programs that are going to competency-based or are playing around with the Mastery Transcript Consortium, or programs that just kind of want assessment to look a little bit differently too. So we have a couple minutes. Please unmute, ask a question I'd love to answer. I can also dive back in the chat and look for more.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I was wondering if there is a reason or rationale behind the lack of parent accounts or parent involvement. I spent a lot of time looking at ed tech tools, and I would notice that most tools like this would usually have parent
Sure.
access.
So there is parent access. So there's 3 different roles in Unrulr. There's the teacher role, the student role, and the observer role. And we see learning communities put parents sometimes in an observer role. But one of the things, the majority of our schools don't want parents to essentially be in the classroom, right, virtually. One, it makes their children less willing to be vulnerable or share things out. One of the really powerful things, Thomas, I don't know if you remember when I published a post, I was able to publish a post. That's a non-Google searchable hyperlink. And what's been so cool, and I did this when I was in Hawaii, was a couple times a month, my students would publish a post and email it to their parents. And we had parents freak out. They were like, I've never seen my daughter as a scientist. I've seen a grade. I've seen some like kind of part of my language bullshit narrative that was clearly copied for every single student. That's how usually that writing is done. But they hadn't seen video evidence of that space as well. And so we see a ton of parent engagement when students are publishing those posts and kind of sharing it out as well. And we're starting to see in schools, because usually Unrulr is just middle school and high school, but we're starting to see some like grades 3 through 5 usage where parents are posting from the home. And there's this learning community of parents who are, especially in our native Hawaiian kind of use cases, where they're capturing kind of culture that they're doing with their kids. So Unrulr's been this really cool vehicle of like erasing that false wall between school and the real world in some meaningful ways.
Totally. Yeah, thanks.
I want to do a real. Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
Sorry, I had a two-part question. I teach second and third graders. So is there a talk to text feature where kids who are just learning how to write, can they, okay, there is.
There is. One of the things I'm really proud of is our audio feature that we just launched. We modeled it off of what a lot of Spotify and others do. So it allows a learner to record audio and then it annotates all of that audio into writing. And I've been pushing for it for quite a while, but I have a great technical founder. My word is never enough, right? He needs other schools to kind of say that audio is powerful there too. Also, there's talk to text if you're using mobile or iPad, regardless of that, because that's kind of built into any mobile or tablet technology.
Okay, amazing. And then the other part was, are we able as the teachers to post on their portfolio or their,
What an
Okay.
awesome question. And I can't believe I forgot. It's one of my favorite features of the tool. So when you're creating a post, do you remember, Hannah, when I was at the end and I was writing my narrative? You can @mention using the @ symbol, and you start typing in the learner's name and it becomes their post, which I love. And you know how I showed you my self view? It shows up in their self view as well. And it's also a really great way of getting groups to be able to capture, you know, the learning that's happening there too. Like, I never want to mess up the vibe. Like, I don't want the reflection or the documentation to get in the way of the beauty of it. And so many times there's like documenters that aren't the person doing it, right? There are these kinds of documentarians for learners too.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to signpost a question from earlier in the chat, Aaron, and I'll try to get to the other ones as well. But Monique asked a question earlier about linking it to Google Classroom. So like linking together assignments, materials, Unrulr,
Yeah.
like how do things talk to each other?
Yeah, it talks to each other. I'd have to have the technical founder kind of go through all of it. It talks to each other on the back end. So the roster that you create in Google Classroom automatically goes into Unrulr. And then I believe the assignments that you're creating in Google Classroom can translate into Unrulr as well. It's a really interesting philosophical debate that we've been having around APIs. Do we want a fully API with Canvas? Do we want a fully API with other tools? Because anytime you work with any school or district or even nonprofit, it's all about the tech stack. And is this going to be the one-to-many tool? And so it's just something that we've thought a lot about. But we can API with anything. It's just a matter of the bandwidth of our team at the moment, and then also the contract that we're creating with an organization.
And then as well, I did want to call attention to Brian's question, which is about Hawaiian diacriticals.
You're damn right it does, Brian. My founder's native Hawaiian. We have a beautiful founder story. Will Rapoon, the Rapoon family sued the federal government for water rights for Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. He comes from this family of disruptors. He went to Punahou, he went to Harvard, he hated both experiences because they weren't who he was as a Native Hawaiian, as an indigenous person. It's my long way of saying yes. There's a really great keyboard hack where you can just click at the top and switch over to Hawaiian on your keyboard, and it puts those diacriticals in. And fun fact, Josh Rapoon, who's Will's uncle, is like the storyteller of innovation in Hawaii and is actually how I came to Unrulr. He's a mentor of mine. And Will, man, I can't tell you, like, in this world of Elon Musk's, he's like the complete opposite. Super humble, like, you know, is really about making learning real and like I said earlier, trying to break down some of those walls that we see so many times in learning communities. So forgive the tangent, and it's like a easy question that I turned into a 3-minute answer.
Are there any other questions that we haven't got to yet? I was going through them. Thomas, go ahead.
If we've got the time, I'm really kind of, this is not Unrulr specific, but something I'm kind of grappling with right now in my practice at the school I'm at. So I'm an IT director at the school I'm at. I spend a lot of time in tech demos. I'm very used to this interaction, but coming back into the space that most of this conference has been in, I'm starting to think more about, like, we just implemented a new LMS that was like a huge lift. That's where I was saying, Chris, like the talking about like having something for a week and then dropping it. I'm in the middle of a 3-year implementation right now that costs somewhere on the order of, let's just say it's 5 figures. And so like, yeah, so that's tough. And that's always the hard thing, is when you spend like a year picking out a tool and then somebody's like, nah, not the tool for me. And I'm like, you could have been in that meeting, that would have helped. But anyways, that's beside the point. What I'm trying to get to is, what I see here is that Unrulr is really a space for learners and teachers to be together and to share a level of communication and intimacy. And what I'm realizing in my implementation thus far is that we've really focused on the parent aspect of it, of communicating with parents, because that's been a space that I think we've lacked as a organization. And so I'm wondering, philosophically and kind of by values, how y'all have decided what to focus on and why. Because what I'm grappling with right now is like, maybe I need to figure out a way to carve out in the tools that we have a space just for kids and teachers that parents cannot get into.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about that. And I think a lot about stuff that I don't want captured in Unrulr, right? Like I was in Hilo, and one of the most incredible navigators in the world is named Chad Paishan. He's a Poe navigator. There's like 3 of those left in the world. And for historical context, they're Hawaiian navigators that only use Hawaiian protocols to navigate. They don't use any modern navigation systems. And Chad said there are things that are sacred in a moment that should just be in the moment, that like only the people that they were there can experience and feel in that space. And I think like there's a beauty and purity to that. And that happens in project-based learning a lot, or that happens in a presentation, or a student that didn't have confidence. I was doing this really cool ideation activity, and the student said, well, there's nothing I'm good at. And then like 5 kids just started saying, you're good at this, you're good at that, you're good at this. And like, it was a super powerful moment that didn't need to be captured and didn't need to be shared with families. But man, there's a really important stuff that should be, that like decolonizes the way they think about education, or decolonizes, you know, that space too. I took this job to really, and I'm just going to swear once, fuck with the college application process. Like, it's disgusting. It harms and traumatizes kids. I've witnessed it too much. And so for me, like, I really want a tool like Unrulr to be just as powerful and viable as a GPA or SAT, or at least be something that's much more supplementary than a bullshit essay that ChatGPT co-wrote of a student exploiting suffering, or like a mission trip they did to Guatemala. You know, like, I'm really interested in like real, you know, artifacts of learning and identity be there too. And so, I don't know, I didn't answer your question at all, but like, I think that you know what is great to share sometimes with families, and what is great to kind of keep internally within that space too. What it comes down to is confidence and belonging for learners, right? All of these moments add up, all these small wins add up, so that they have an incredible demo day at the end of an experience, or do really well on a public exhibition, or if a test is your thing, do well on a test. And so for me, it's like, how do we just carve out that time for those small wins too? I mean, I can't emphasize enough the power of reflection, and saving time for reflection, and celebrating reflection. We see a lot of schools take Unrulr posts that students are doing over the course of the week, and they like do a do now exercise out of them. They have them on the big screen with the permission of the poster. And they're like, I want to celebrate this post to everyone, right? And then they run protocols where people will jump into that post and just add comments and add questions and create this beautiful thread of conversation. Like, I just can't emphasize enough, like, when we allow for metacognition and we allow for space, you're going to see so many learners actually be able to see themselves as successful in a learning experience.
Monique, I can see you trying to speak and you remain muted.
I was talking to
So-
myself because I'm
okay.
playing around with it. I'm connecting it to the Google Classroom. And at the same time, I'm thinking about standard-based grading because we should do that at the high school level, if at all, because the school's very traditional when it comes to their grading. So I'm thinking about this as a model to create the standards to then apply the standard-based grading to the entire
Totally.
high school, which would be
Totally.
like, because then I feel like one of the things that happens is everyone's freaking out about the technology and what are we going to use? And this makes sense. That's why I was talking to myself about it.
I mean, we've seen usage of Unrulr as a policy tool or a change tool in schools. So like so many schools are in the process of building out their portrait of a graduate, another buzzword, you know, the key competencies of their school. And they don't know what words are actually true. And so I was showing this to a friend. He's like, this is a lexicon tool. This allows you to kind of see the visual lexicon of your community. And so you might say like grit is a core part of your learning community. You would use Unrulr, you have it as a cog or a tag, and there's no evidence of grit, right? And that's a single data point, but like over the course of the year, that might show that a different word is really at the core of what you do too. And what's also interesting, I'm in this PCBL space a lot, personalized competency-based learning. So much of it, students have no idea what's going on. They don't know what you mean by empathy, right? Your school might have a different definition of mindfulness than someone else. And so Unrulr has been a tool that visualizes what your community means by these standards and phrases and things you use in your rubric too, if that makes sense.
Any final questions for Aaron? We got like 2 minutes here left. Again, I know it's kind of like a tech demonstration, which definitely feels a little bit different than some of the other sessions we've had, but we genuinely do use this tool. It's useful.
I mean, I'd love for you to use the tool. I'd love to, you know, be at a startup that has revenue and succeeds. But if you don't, like, just be about reflection in your learning communities. Just be about having the identities of your learners be central to your learning experience. Like, that's the purpose of this conversation. And, you know, just like, I didn't realize how powerful capturing process was. I called what I did product-based learning, and I was proud of it. I felt cool. Partner my students with people in industry. I'd find like Kendrick Lamar's videographer and partner him with a student and like pat myself on the back. But so many students felt like the experience was a failure because process wasn't celebrated at the end of the day. And we have to enshrine process. We have to allow learners to feel like that's a super core part of it. And so if you get anything from this presentation, it's just the power of process. If you're interested, contact me. If you want to just hang out over Zoom, contact me. I threw my email in there. Thanks for your time, and just really grateful to get to talk to you all.
Thanks, Aaron. Again, we appreciate it. You can find all the links about Unrulr more, both on our Discord. It'll also be in the YouTube description, etc. As a reminder, we have another session coming up in like 10 minutes. It's just going to be on the same Zoom call. If you want to just like stay in the call and mute and deafen or whatever, and we'll get back started at 4 Eastern. But again, Aaron, we appreciate it. The next session is teachers going gradeless. I'm talking about gradeless learning. So talk soon. Good segue too. And Aaron, of course, feel free to hang out in the Discord. I'll follow up with you here at some point in the next like, couple of days.
Yeah,
we'll
no, take your time. Thank you. I'd love to, can you send me the chat at some point too? I'd love to kind of go through it later on.
If you don't get that tonight, send me a reminder email.
Oh my God, dude, you're super busy. Sometime in the next 2 months.
I want to do it. I'm just making a mental note tonight. That sounds like something I'm going to forget. So please, please let me know. And if you're here for teachers going gradeless, I know David, you are. I'm going to give you co-host now. And everybody's going to live in this like awkward space of doing this transition here. Let me go ahead and do this too. I'm going to turn that on.